I didn't believe in ghost stories. Not until the night I drove along Route 90. I was heading home late after a long shift at work, the kind of night where the highway is dead quiet, except for the hum of your own engine. Route 90 cuts through miles of flat, empty desert, so it's easy to feel like you're the only person in the world out there. It was around 2 a.m., and the road stretched endlessly in front of me, lit only by my high beams. The monotony of the drive was starting to get to me when I saw them, headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved. I hadn't seen another car for hours, and it was nice to know I wasn't alone. The car behind me was getting closer, its headlights brighter by the second. I figured it was just someone in a hurry, so I moved over to the right lane to let them pass. But they didn't. Instead, they stayed right behind me, their headlights glaring in my mirror. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us, but the car matched my speed perfectly. It was unnerving. I couldn't make out the vehicle, just the blinding lights bearing down on me. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just some jerk playing games. But then the lights got closer, impossibly close, like the car was about to rear-end me. My heart was racing as I tightened my grip on the wheel. And then, the lights were gone. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the car pulling back, but there was nothing. Just empty highway stretching out behind me. My hands were shaking as I checked again, convinced I'd missed something, but the road was deserted. I slowed down, trying to make sense of what just happened, when the lights reappeared. This time they weren't behind me. They were in front of me, barreling toward me in my lane. I slammed on the brakes, bracing for impact, but the car didn't stop. It sped straight at me, its headlights blinding, its engine roaring louder than anything I'd ever heard. And then, just before it would have hit me, it vanished. I sat there in the middle of the road, heart pounding, trying to catch my breath. It was like the car had never been there, but I knew what I saw. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I drove the rest of the way home as fast as I could, constantly checking the mirrors, half expecting the lights to return. They didn't. The next day, I told a coworker about it, half laughing as I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion or my imagination. But he didn't laugh back. "That's the ghost car," he said, his voice dead serious. "You're lucky it didn't run you off the road. A lot of people don't make it home after seeing those lights." I tried to shrug it off, but it stayed with me. And now, every time I drive that stretch of Route 90, I feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes I think I see headlights in the distance, and my stomach drops, because I know that if those lights catch up to me again, I might not be so lucky next time. I've always heard stories about Clinton Road in New Jersey, but I never thought I'd see anything myself. People talk about all sorts of things: phantom cars, strange lights, figures that appear out of nowhere. I figured it was just urban legend stuff. That was until the night I drove down that cursed road by myself. It was late, around 1 a.m. I was coming back from visiting a friend and decided to take Clinton Road as a shortcut. The highway had been deserted for miles, and the stillness was starting to get to me. Trees towered on both sides of the narrow road, their branches stretching over like skeletal hands. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me. About halfway through, I noticed something strange in the distance. It looked like a woman walking on the side of the road. She was wearing a long, pale dress that seemed out of place for the time of year. It was the middle of fall, and the air was cold. She wasn't hitchhiking, just walking slowly, her head tilted slightly downward like she didn't have a care in the world. I slowed down instinctively, not wanting to accidentally hit her. As I got closer, I noticed how odd she looked. Her dress was old-fashioned, like something out of the early 1900s. and her hair was long and unkempt. I leaned forward, trying to get a better look, but when my headlights passed over her, I froze. Her face, if you could even call it that, was hollow. No eyes, no mouth, just empty blackness where features should have been. My stomach turned, and my foot instinctively hit the brakes. For a moment, I thought I must have imagined it, but then she turned to face me. I don't know how to describe the feeling that washed over me. It was like my entire body screamed to get away. Her head tilted unnaturally to the side, almost as if she was curious about me. Then she took a step toward the car. I panicked. My hands were shaking as I threw the car into reverse. The tires screeched as I backed away, but she didn't stop. She kept walking toward me, slow and deliberate. Her hollow face never wavered, even as I sped backward down the winding road. And then, just as suddenly as she'd appeared, she was gone. 1 second she was there, and the next she vanished, as if she'd melted into the darkness. I slammed on the brakes and sat there in the middle of the road, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Later, I looked up stories about Clinton Road. Turns out, I'm not the only one who's seen the woman in white. Some say she's the ghost of someone who was killed on the road decades ago, wandering and searching for something, or someone. Others think she's just a warning to stay off the road. Either way, I'm never going back to find out. Whatever's out there, it doesn't want you to leave. I had heard stories about the A75 Kinmont Straight in Scotland, tales of ghostly animals, spectral figures, and even phantom vehicles. But honestly, I thought it was all just folklore. That was, until I had my own encounter on that road one foggy night. It was a chilly October evening, and I was heading back home after visiting a friend in Dumfries. The fog was thick, clinging to the road and swallowing up the headlights of my car. I had driven this route plenty of times before, but that night, it felt different. Heavier, quieter, as though the world around me was holding its breath. I was about halfway down the A75 when it happened. At first, it was just a flicker of light in the distance. I thought it might be another car or a truck coming from the opposite direction, but the light didn't behave like normal headlights. It bobbed and wavered, almost like it was floating. I kept driving, gripping the wheel tighter as the light drew closer. Suddenly, it split into two beams, bright and blinding. It wasn't until I heard the low rumble of an engine that I realized it was a truck, a massive one, barreling straight toward me in my lane. I panicked. My first instinct was to swerve, but there was nowhere to go. The road was narrow, lined with dense trees on either side. I hit the brakes, my heart racing, as the truck hurtled closer. Its headlights grew brighter, filling the entire windshield with white light. I braced myself for the impact. And then, nothing. The truck vanished. The headlights disappeared as though they had never been there. My car was still in the middle of the road, shaking slightly from the sudden stop. But the only thing in front of me was an empty stretch of foggy highway. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. Maybe it was the fog playing tricks on me. Maybe I was tired and imagining things. That's what I told myself anyway. But then I noticed the air in the car. It was cold, freezing cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out of the space. I started driving again, a little slower this time, my eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror. That's when I saw it again. The truck was back, but this time, it was behind me. Its headlights were brighter than before, almost too bright, like they were burning straight through the fog. The rumble of the engine was deafening, shaking the car as it drew closer and closer. And then, just like before, it was gone. 1 second it was right there, the headlights nearly blinding me, and the next, I was alone. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the hum of my own engine and the sound of my ragged breathing. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into the nearest gas station and sat there in my car, hands still gripping the wheel. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not the attendant, not the other drivers. What could I even say? Later, I found out that my experience wasn't unique. Over the years, countless people have reported seeing a phantom truck on the A75. Some say it's a spectral remnant of a tragic accident. Others think it's a warning, meant to scare drivers into staying alert. All I know is that I'll never forget those blinding lights, or the way that engine growled like it was alive. They call the A75 the most haunted road in Scotland, and after that night, I understand why.